Today, let's talk about Telugu noun formations. The noun forming process is well understood for languages like Sanskrit, and if we are to talk about Dravidian languages like Telugu, you can look at Tamil, which has its own independent grammar tradition, such as the Tolkappiyam and such. And I'm wondering, should Telugu also have some noun formation rules? Well, it turns out it does, but it's sad that it's very understudied. With that being said, let's study how Telugu nouns can be formed, especially from verbal roots. Admittedly, I got this from secondhand sources, meaning social media, as again, it has been very understudied. But I do mention stuff about Proto Dravidian, and that is actually from a scholarly source, namely that of Krishnamurthi. Now, let's start. However, one thing to note with Telugu is that the derivations of the nouns from the verbal roots depend on the endings of the verbal roots themselves. Just to list them out, you have yu, vu, chu, ku. You also have gu, du, and just regular u. So now the first set of verb roots are the ones that end in u or yi. For example, nenu chestanu, nuvu cheyi. The thing is, e and u are interchangeable sometimes in Telugu. To make a noun from verb roots ending in u, you just drop a u from the root and then add ta. So let's see how this is like with some examples. Chesedi cheta, vesedi veta, and finally posedi pota. Interesting fact about the last one, the word pota, while it does mean pouring in general, seems to also have a specific use in terms of pouring metal or casting a molten metal. Anyway, me sindi meta kana meta koyetamu kota. Now, while kota can mean cutting in general, it seems to have a connotation of harvesting. Moving on, mu sedi muta, not mota. But if you put a weight on top of the lid, then muta mo sedi mota. Anyway, ra sedi rata, rata me the gi sedi gita. If ti sedi tita and pu sedi puta, then to sedi tota. Seriously, I'm legitimately asking this. I can't find any attestations of this word, so confirm to me, is to sedi tota? Anyway, moving on to verb roots that end in just u, not ku or vu. Actually, the thing is that the u has a variation of vu. It's very, very, very common in Telugu. I just can't explain it right now. To give an example, nenu koratanu, nuvu koru, late nuvu koruko. An informal rule is if you can say ko like koru ko, then what I'm about to say will apply. Alternatively, this nominal derivation rule can only apply to verbal roots that don't take a direct object, but I'm not sure. Anyway, what you do for these types of verb is you remove the u and add ika or aka. However, before going on to examples, I want to mention that a lot of times verb roots ending in u themselves become the nominal form, but more on this later. Back to examples. Nammedi nammika or namaka. Here's the thing. Nammu, namatam takes a direct object, which is why I'm not sure when you'd add an aka or ika or when you just use the verbal root by itself for verbs ending in u or vu. Padukunnedi padaka. Poredi polika kani polundedi polika. Now, polika actually means resemblance. So when family members say mukku ever polika, they're literally saying whose resemblance is the nose. However, this is using the verb intransitively. To use it transitively, which is the most common way of using this verb root, then that is polchatam, which means to compare. And then you get the noun polpu, meaning a comparison. We are going to cover verb roots ending in chu very soon. Now, before moving on, there's one verb root I really want to touch upon. It's kind of an exception, and that is po, meaning to go. The nominal form is poka. So you could pretend that the verb root is povu. Anyway, kore di korika, umme di ommika, and oppe di opika. One thing to note here is that ommu and oppu are from the same etymological root. Now, on verbs that end in padu. Now, padu means to fall, but here it's kind of used as an auxiliary suffix. Given how many verbs end in padu, like kanapadu, todupadu, I think it deserves its own section. So the way to nominalize this type of verb form is you remove the padu and add patu. Hence, todaparatam is todupatu, Kashtaparatam is Kashtapatu. One thing to note is Kashta and Kashtapatu is actually from Sanskrit. Siguparatam Sigupatu, Nilaparatam Nilapatu. Nilaparatam actually means firmness or steadfastness. and is from the root nil, meaning to stand. Poraparatam aite ayedi porapatu. And finally, uttiga paratam is patu. Moving on to verb roots that end in gu. Examples include velugu and adugu. Nominalize these verb roots, you drop the gu and add ka. And yes, this does resemble the nominal forms such as namakam or opika. I'll explain this more later. Anyway, adigedi aduka or adaka, yes, these are variants. And veligedi veluka. There's also velugu in and of itself, and that also means the same thing as veluka, a glow or a shine or a light. Again, more on this later. Anyway, alagatam is alaka, and then you have more. Rigedi eruka. Now, erugu means to know. However, this word is not used to express that you know something. You say teliyatam naaku telustundi. It literally means this is clear to me or this is understandable to me, where teliyatam is actually cognate to tella, meaning white, because white means clarity or understanding. Now I'm wondering if you could do something like this, where chemistry can be rasayeruka, meaning knowledge of chemicals, and math can be lekkaleruka, meaning the knowledge of numbers. I guess this could be the alternative to the Sanskrit forms rasasashtra or ganitasashtra. In case, once we understand how nouns are formed in Telugu, we can actually coin new words that are pure Telugu, not even of Sanskrit origin, and that kind of has a potential when it comes to preserving our language and understanding our culture. Also, despite the previous videos of me coining Sanskrit words for science terms, I'm not the first to do such an act for any Indian language. In fact, for Telugu, there's a scholar called Vemuri who made a Telugu English dictionary including entries of technical terms, whether they're derived from Sanskrit or from pure Telugu. Now let's move on. Munigedi Munaka. And on the spirit of coining new words, a submarine could be technically called a munakapadava, meaning a submerging boat. Now, actually on to why the endings of gu show similar patterns to verbs ending in u. Because gu is derived from u. U becomes vu, like dumu vu, and that becomes gu finally as a mutation. And this is a common occurrence in Telugu. This is why a variation of pilavadu is pilagadu. Now, remember how I said that verb roots ending in just u itself become a noun? Well, if you take the word velugu, the gu is related to the u, and velugu itself is a noun. Now, you also have the derivation veluka, as mentioned, and that has the same meaning as velugu. Both are nouns, following two different noun patterns owing to the fact that the ending is u or gu. And on this matter, you could also say velugu as veluvu. Example of this phenomenon is the word enugu, meaning elephant. Enu is like the actual core word. Then you have the vu ending that derives from the u, so enuvu. But then you have that mutation, enugu. On this matter, for monosyllabic roots, that too ending in u, you just add an a, and this is from the Proto Dravidian suffix I, though I think I is a variation of u itself. This is why I'm thinking that the end result is sometimes in Telugu that the verb root itself is the noun. So vattu, meaning to squeeze, is also a noun meaning a stress. Now, in regards to the a suffix, in Telugu we have an example. We have vilu, meaning to sell, and then its nominal form vela, meaning price. Now again, u becomes vu, so we have words like viluvu, or incidentally, viluva, which also means the same meaning, a price or worth. And on this note, ground or land is called nela, as it's related to the root nil, as in nilaparatam, because you stand on land. Now another example is from the Proto-Dravidian root kor or kon. In Telugu we have kolu and konu. Yes, to buy, konatam, is related to this word. It actually means to grasp or to take, because when you buy, you're grasping that item or taking that item. In Sanskrit, we have the word grahaka, which means a grasper or a seizer, but also a word just meaning buyer, from the root grh, meaning to grasp or take. Now, from this root, we have Telugu word kolla. You see that a suffix, and it means to steal or plunder. Moving on to verb roots that end in chu, like eruchu and maruchu. The way to nominalize these verb roots is you drop the chu and add pu. Now, before we begin, a brief lesson on linguistics. The chu suffix is an error. You see, one of the Proto-Dravidian suffix to indicate the gerund is chi, which is added to certain roots. So nil, nil chi. You have ed chi, pili chi, and all that. The other thing to note is that this is confused with the more common gerund marker e, like vini, tini, velli. Because of this, the cha became added to the verb root, reanalyzed. So nil chi became nilch plus e. and that's why you have the verb stem nilchu or niluchu. Another thing to note is that chu is a natural derivation of the transitive marker from Proto Dravidian nt, and it was also a variation of another Proto Dravidian transitive marker pu. And now you can see why verbs ending in chu become pu when becoming nominalized. Now on to examples. Edchedi edupu, marchipovatam is marupu, nilchedi nilupu. I think niluchu means to stay steadfast or remain standing. Anyway, merisedi merupu, karisedi karupu, marchedi marpu, and pilchedi pilupu, and last but not least, chusedi chupu. Now, you can actually add a do or a d to the previous suffix, and the meaning changes a bit subtly. Only rarely does it change considerably, and I'll show you when that happens. Now, let me illustrate this with examples. You have pilupu, pilupudu, marpu, marpudu, arupu, arupudu. The changing meaning is subtle. Let me illustrate this with an example. If I shout, then it's arupu. One shout is an arupu. But if I shout continuously, then it becomes arupudu. Alternatively, if there are a group of people shouting, that's also arupudu. So again, adding do changes this word to have a connotation of habituality, recursiveness, or happening en masse. Now, let me show you an example where the meaning changes considerably. You have velpu meaning God from the root veluchu meaning to sacrifice or to worship. But then you have velpudu which refers to the act of worshipping or sacrificing. So adding do changes the meaning here. Another rule that I think exists is that if the previous syllable has an E sound, then the do becomes a D. And actually E and U are variants. So you have tinu but tindi. Now, for some true verbs, we add a key and then following the rule a d because the previous syllable ends in an I. And thus, we have vinuchu, vinikidi, piduchu, pidikidi. I'm not sure of the last one. One thing to note is why we add the key suffix, I'm not sure. I think it's from the Proto Dravidian ikai suffix, the same one that gives rise to forms like omika, opika, namakam. I'm going to illustrate the do or d rule with the verb root teliu. We have telupu meaning white, but then we have telupudu meaning whiteness. Then we have telivi meaning skill or cleverness. When you have telividi meaning a state of being skillful or skillfulness or a state of being clever. Now another suffix I want to talk about is the ili suffix from Proto Dravidian al. Example is Telugu engili. Now there's no steadfast rule to this because these words with ili all trace back to Proto Dravidian and you have to memorize these forms. I'll give examples nonetheless. You have engu, engili, vekku, vekkili. But then some other words from Proto Dravidian is chikkili, nenjili, and migili or migulu. Anyway, back to the main topic of verb roots. Specifically, let's look at verb roots that end in do, like padu or vandu. Convert these into nouns. What you do is you drop the do suffix and add ta or tu, and the rules to determine which to add. In a certain root, the long vowel stays long and the ending is a ta. However, if the verb root has a short vowel, the short vowel longens and the ending becomes a tu. Unless the do is preceded by a nasal consonant or the verb is going to be made into a noun by stressing it. You'll see in the examples. And in this case, the ending is ta. Now, the following are examples of verb roots that have long vowels. Ade di ata, pade di pata, vade di vata. Vata here actually means habit, as opposed to use. Now, the next are examples of short vowel verb roots that lengthen where the ending becomes tu. Now, here's one we have most definitely encountered before. Padedi patu, as in todu patu, siggu patu, etc. I can think of is potu from podavatam, meaning to stab or to thrust. There is also chetu from chedu, meaning ruin or destruction. And yes, chedu itself is a noun, a verbal noun meaning bad. The well-known verb form of this root is cherupu, meaning to erase. But not least is katu from karu. Yes, I know it's ru, but the older form is with du or tu. Yes, sometimes du and ru are exchangeable in Dravidian languages, such as Telugu, which is why sometimes I might pronounce appudu as appuru. Now comes the case where the verb root has short vowel and the do is preceded by a nasal consonant. Pandedi vanta, mandedi manta, pandedi panta. Fun fact about the last one. The root pandu is actually a modification of an older root par, meaning, to ripen. and after adding the ntu suffix, you get pandu. And yes, that is also where the noun pandu as in fruit comes from. This is actually evident from the Tamil word for fruit, and it is from this Proto Dravidian root that you get the Sanskrit word phala. In regards to the last syllable being stressed, that rule, we have only one word. Well, I found one word, and that's chatta, meaning evil, from chedu, the same root that you get chetu and cherupu. Though I do not know when the rule of lengthening, such as chetu, or the stress root such as chatta will apply. Words, there's no steadfast rule as to which to do, otherwise poriche di potta. Let's depart from verb roots and talk about other nominalizing suffix. The Dravidian mai suffix. Proto-Dravidian mai or may, which means body but is also an abstract suffix, and I think these two definitions are related somehow. Basically, you have like a adjective or a verb-derived adjective or something like that, and then you add the may suffix and it converts it into an abstract noun or a deadjective noun. So peru, meaning big, then mai gets peru mai, which means bigness or greatness. In Telugu, that is perimi. The mai suffix in Telugu is mi or me. Now, to understand how to use this suffix, you also have to look at the verb root that the adjective or some other word that we're deriving from is derived from. On to some examples. You have pedda from the root peru, hence perimi. Then you have melu, meaning good, and melimi, meaning goodness or righteousness. With the verb kalugu from the root kala, we have kalimi. Now, kalugu means to exist, so kalimi means existence. Not all the time do we have to look at the verb root, and not all of these are necessarily adjectives that we're deriving from. In fact, consider the following case. Cheli, meaning female friend or female companion, and thus chelimi, meaning friendship. And apparently this is friendship regardless of the genders involved. Notice that the word cheli is actually a noun, not an adjective or a verb. Here's a fun fact. The Proto-Dravidian root from which cheli derives from just means female companion. And what's interesting about this is it is from this root where you get cheli in modern Telugu meaning girlfriend and chelli meaning younger sister. Generic and definitely platonic word for friendship in Telugu is kurimi from kuruchu. Now another suffix is the agentive suffix ari. I don't know the Proto-Dravidian etymology of this agentive suffix, but what I do know is that it can be used for both verbs and nouns. Here's an example of how they work. You have polam plus ari, you get polamari, meaning a cultivator. Cultivator is one who works in the field. Now you can use these for verbs, but you have to perform the noun derivations that I mentioned previously. You can rationalize this suffix as something like fireman or boatman or worker or runner, something like that. But this ari suffix is actually neutral in gender. In fact, this is actually in contrast to Sanskrit, where occupational roles or such nouns must be given a gender. So the answer is nartaka if it's a male, but nartaki if it's a female. Now let's look at some examples. Nesevaru netari, nerpevaru late nerchukunevaru nerpari, rasevaru ratari. Here's an interesting example. Puja chesevaru pujari. Now, puja is actually a Sanskrit word, and if you actually analyze pujari in a pure Sanskrit way, you get the meaning enemy of a puja, because ari in Sanskrit means enemy. Anyway, alakevadu alakari, meaning a coward. Next, kalamu meda panjesevaru kalamari. Kalamu means a vessel, as in a boat or a ship. Kattevaru kattari, chupevaru chupari. Except here, it's not. Chupari should mean a person who looks, but here it seems to be a person of looks, or chuparevaru chupari. And finally, kollachesevaru kollari. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and please do correct me on any mistakes.